He's in charge of the hemp.
Guy Lehrberger.
Yes,
I worked with his
All right,
brother
folks, we're going to start our
40
second
years
panel.
ago in the solar
We
industry.
spoke in our first
Small
panel
world.
quite a few times about some of the legislative restrictions and regulations that are facing the hemp industry. And today we have three experts on the subject, including your host for today, Congressman Jerad Polis. And he's going to start us off. Each member is going to do very similar as we did last panel, 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Congressman Polis?
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and I want to acknowledge the tremendous work of our outreach director, Mara Brosi-Wichar. Let's give her a round of applause.
Bravo!
Together. There is such tremendous interest in industrial hemp, not only in Colorado, but across the entire country. And in many ways, it's because it's been an opportunity that Americans have been locked out of for far too long. We, of course, have always been and continue to be consumers of industrial hemp products, whether it's body products or car interiors or sports coats. Mara wanted me to wear my hemp sports jacket here, but the problem is I brought it to Washington, D.C. so I can wear it on the floor of the House of Representatives. So I have to bring it back one of these times. Food and nutritional products, so many others. But as you know, all of that hemp is essentially imported from countries like Canada, over $600 million of industrial hemp products that Americans are locked out of, and we're gradually tearing down those barriers, but have been locked out of those agricultural opportunities, consumer product opportunities, processing opportunities that emerge from that. So we're making progress, and as you know, Colorado is one of the states leading the country. We have a terrific regulatory structure through our Department of Agriculture, which you'll hear more about. Over 200 acres of hemp were harvested last season in Colorado. There's still a burden on the farmers for testing and certification, but where we expect to go and will get, I like to be optimistic, so I often say within 2 years, but Dwayne will probably say within 3 or 4 years, is to have certified seed so that farmers can acquire a scalable amount of seed that's certified to produce acceptable industrial hemp crop. And as long as, just as they do in other countries, as long as that seed is being grown, they're meeting their burden as a farmer. In January, I worked on a bipartisan bill, and I also worked with Representative Massey from Kentucky on the Industrial Hemp Farming Act that, of course, would clarify the legal status of industrial hemp. Never should have been swept up in the Controlled Substances Act in the first place. And I applaud Colorado for its separate regulatory regimes. When we're talking about a regulatory regime around industrial hemp, that's going to look very different than a regulatory scheme around marijuana. Now, they're both legal in Colorado, but marijuana is, of course, a tightly controlled substance. Many towns don't even allow its sale. Industrial hemp is an agricultural product, and as you know, it does not contain any substantial amounts of any compound that could be used in any way as a narcotic. So we're working on explaining this to our colleagues in Congress through the appropriations process, through amendments that we run. When the DEA seizes seed, as they did last year, seeds that were intended for university research in Kentucky, we worked very closely with other representatives to get those released and to clarify in the Farm Bill successfully that institutions of higher education can do work on industrial hemp without risking their federal funding. Now, we had argued to CSU and CU before we passed that they wouldn't risk losing their federal funding over this, but because they value their federal funding so highly and they have teams of lawyers, they said, well, there could be a risk. And so we got that language in, and now, of course, we're in the early stages of more robust research into industrial hemp products, and that's why we continue to call on my colleagues in Congress as well as the USDA to be proactive in making federal resources available to hemp research programs like the joint programs that already exist between CU and CSU. So the other thing I want to address, and I think as I was meeting a few folks during the period just before this, some of you asked what is the future federally, right? So where are we going? On this issue of industrial hemp, we have a majority of the House of Representatives today that is fully supportive of regulating industrial hemp like an agricultural commodity. We haven't had a test vote in the Senate, so we don't know for sure that we have a majority, but I'm confident that we do. So when you have that kind of majority, you think something would just happen right away, but oh no, Congress doesn't work like that. It's very slow. You've probably heard about that. So there has to be a vehicle for it, but it's really only a matter of time, I think, until we can find an appropriate vehicle. And we have these test votes. They're on something called appropriations bills. We win on the floor of the House, but of course the appropriations bills never become law. Instead, we do something called an omnibus or continuing resolution. It's too much detail to get into here, but suffice to say, we have the votes. We just have to find the vehicle that will pass the House, pass the Senate, be signed by the President, most likely as part of a larger bill. So I am optimistic that, whether it's 1 year or 3 years, I can't tell you. But in the meantime, we can make incremental progress. So for instance, in the Farm Bill, the key piece there was industrial hemp research at universities. So that language was included in the Farm Bill. It wouldn't have been germane to include broader language around industrial hemp, but the appropriate language we were able to include. So within each appropriate bill that goes forward, we can win with the position that allows industrial hemp to be looked at as the agricultural commodity it is. And as you know, it wasn't that long ago that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was trumpeting industrial hemp. Many of you have seen the videos that our own USDA produced in the 40s and 50s talking about the great opportunities of industrial hemp. And heck, we'll be happy. We don't have to return to those days. We just want to let them allow this great hemp economy to continue to grow in states like Colorado, Kentucky, Oregon, and so many others with great health benefits, with great economic benefits. And something that I think we're really on the threshold of reaching at the federal level.
Oh.
We applaud her.
Wow.
Thank you, Congressman Polis. Thank you, Mara, for putting this together. My name is Samantha Walsh. I'm with the National Hemp Association. I am a lobbyist who's been working on the hemp issue now since the passage of Amendment 64. I guess since Congressman Polis touched on a lot of what they're doing on a federal level, and Dwayne is going to touch a lot on what the great Department of Agriculture here in Colorado, which, by the way, I just have to say is a trade association that works closely with the Department of Agriculture. They are so supportive of this industry here in Colorado, unlike what you see in other states, where a lot of the Departments of Agriculture have sort of caved in to law enforcement, who really want to still see this, regulated very rigorously and treated like a criminal crop. They have treated, the Department of Agriculture has supported our efforts to treat this like a regular crop, to just let farmers farm it, to just let businesses process it, and as much as they can. And they've been really supportive, so we're always thankful to work with their department. Our association, what we do, so what I'll touch on is what we do and where we sort of see legislation going. We represent businesses, advocates in the hemp industry, and we are trying to, we are working with political leaders and these businesses to help create the legislation that is going to be the vehicle that Congressman Polis talks about that will get this industry to where it needs to be. And like Congressman Polis said, there's so many different approaches to how we do this. And I know National Hemp Association is going to be focusing on, one, how do we get hemp in all of its uses removed from the Controlled Substances Act so it can be a crop that can revitalize our agriculture industry. Two, how do we, one of the things we want to do is make it politically relevant. Because I don't know if you guys have heard, I haven't heard a single presidential candidate speak about hemp or marijuana. Rand Paul did do a fundraiser, but he didn't even really mention marijuana out in the public. He's been an advocate. He's the senator out of Kentucky running for president. But I know our association really wants to make this an election year issue with politicians. And we're going to really try and use that because we think it is an election issue. This is a constituent issue. This touches on all sectors of that voters care about. It's about job creation here in America, especially here in Colorado. It's about technology and innovation. And it's about people being able to provide for themselves. It's about getting big agricultural office subsidies and letting the people be able to create a crop that's very versatile. and it isn't going to have to rely on that kind of subsidies to be successful. And it's about just people being not criminalized for growing something, farmers, that they shouldn't be criminalized for growing. It's a crop. And so that's one of our goals as well. And then our third goal is how do we get this crop plugged into existing industries? So what you saw a lot of the entrepreneurs and innovators talking about now is, Ed talking about, incorporating this into plastics. People you're now seeing incorporating it into health and beauty aids. It's just sort of the tradition. Everybody knows that you can have hemp soap and that you can have hemp textiles. Our association is working with businesses to show how can we get this crop plugged into industries that already exist. How do we make it a supplement for building materials? Because we all know, and anybody who's educated on hemp knows, this is a material that when you use it for insulation or use it for building materials is 30% more energy efficient. It's fire resistant, it's mold resistant, it's perfect green technology. How do we get this plugged into the protein industry? We see the droughts that are happening in California. A lot of those droughts, which people don't seem to understand, are coming from protein-intensive crops. This is your soy. This is your, what's another protein it creates? Almonds, thank you. You're drinking almond milk. You're wasting way too much water. And we all know that hemp is working as a dryland crop, that it really just needs as much water as it needs, right? You don't have to overwater it. There have been very successful feedback that we've heard. Colorado's had sort of a wet season, but we've heard a lot of great feedback so far from our farmers within our association who have been, without having to irrigate and just using dry land growing techniques, have had very good results. Their crops are very tall and thriving. And, this is something that can help with these environmental crises that we're saving. So that's another thing that our association is working on. How do we get it plugged into these existing industries? And then the fourth leg of our, sort of our mission statement and our political goals are how do we get governments now to use hemp? How do we educate our local governments? Clearly, we're facing a huge tragedy right now with the EPA and the spill out of chemical toxic water into the Los Animas. Is there a way? Are there innovators out there that we can use hemp as a filter? We all know that it's a great filter. There have been trial runs that have been done through Colorado School of Mines that have shown that hemp actually picks up heavy metals very well. So Dr. Eric Hunter did that, and he found that it does a great job of being able to absorb gold. So, how do we get hemp being to use as local governments to now clean up our environment? Do we use it for the mill tillings in Western Slope? Do we use it for the Rocky Flats area and to clean that up? And so, that's a sort of our missions that our organization is exploring is how do we make hemp not only politically relevant, but make it, industrially relevant again, I guess, and make it, show these new businesses and governments that this is a product that fits for them. And, we might be saying, well, why would you do that? It sort of seems obvious because we can't do it alone. The key of legislative lobbying and being able to pass these goals is to have allies. And we need more allies in this industry. And that's something that National Hemp Association is working on, is how do we get these allies to help us move that political football across the goal line. And so if we can partner up with big agricultural industries who want to see this as a replacement crop, with new technology industries who want to see this as a building material, a cheap and easy building material that they can incorporate into their business structure, whether or not they're creating cars because it's lighter and stronger, or they're creating new plastics, or they're creating building materials. Because that now, instead of having one voice speak about what we all know, which is this is a great crop and it should be legalized on the federal level, now we have 20 voices speaking to that. And so that's what our association does, and that's sort of what we see the new political landscape being when it comes to how we treat this crop politically and legislatively.
So I'm Dwayne Sinning with the Department of Ag, Colorado Department of Ag, and I'm gonna expound a little bit on what Representative Polis said. Last year there were about 200 acres grown in the state. We had about 1,800 registered. a lot of those were people, we actually had a number of people that came in, wanted a registration just so that they could have a certificate on their wall that said they could break federal law and the state was okay with that. Those days are already gone in the hemp program. So right now we have about 3,000 acres registered. Our estimate is that about 2,000 of those will be harvested this year. We also have almost 500,000 square feet indoor production. That didn't exist last year. So it is a remarkable change, and that is really attributed to the folks here in the audience and the entrepreneurship that you really show. So that really that's a little bit about where you're at or where the industry's at now in the state. A little bit about some of the things that just recently happened. August 5th, it became legal not only to cultivate hemp in the state of Colorado or to process it, but it actually became legal to possess it in order to cultivate it and to transport it. It became legal August 5th because before that, the Attorney General in this state had openly told us that you have the right to cultivate and you have the right to process, but you better not be transporting it to that processor. So we have some battles internally within the state. They're not always on the, we don't always find our resources only in the federal government and folks like Representative Polis that help us get there. Sometimes it is folks like Samantha and National Hemp Association that help lobby on our behalf and work with us to get some of these things, the craziness that continues at all levels. So I really have to thank them as well for it. Along with that, transport and possess, we were able to open up the labs so that people can test at the same marijuana labs. Now that'll take us a while. The funding became available on the 5th, and we've got a bunch of loopholes we have to jump through with MED in order to fit their labs, but that's coming, and so that should help. Maybe the biggest one, though, of the things that came was funding for the certified seed program, so that we can actually now start to look at varieties, whether it's material that John McKay up at CSU does, or New West Genetics, or any number of the other breeders in the state, or externally, that we could import, take a look, and make sure they fit with what the standards that the state has told us, which is the 0.3%. And if a variety performs at 0.3%, and the state has gone out and tested those varieties in broad geographic regions, there is absolutely no reason we ought to be coming back to the farmers. If we didn't do our job in the first place to tell you that was, as a farmer, that variety was below, we shouldn't be coming to you afterward. So the goal is to get a certified seed program that allows a farmer to go out and plant varieties without any further government intervention than has to be. I would say, so the funding became available on the 5th of August, which means next summer we'll be planting out test fields, and we're looking at, this is all in the formulative parts. I'll be talking to Ed as soon as we get something, because Ed's on the Industrial Hemp Advisory Committee, I hope still. But what we're looking at is taking and doing plantings next spring in 5 geographic regions: Northeast, Southeast, Front Range, San Luis Valley, and on the western slope. And if a variety passed there, it would go into seed certified production in the same way that you would find corn going to.
All right,
So,
Yeah, I think there's more you have to
I'm going
say.
to do one exercise if I can, real quick, because the one thing I've heard a lot about is Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So if you're in the back, if you're not in the first 4 rows, stand up a minute.
Not in the first 4 rows, stand
If
up.
you're not in the back, if you're not in the first 4 rows, okay, you've all been excluded from hemp now because
Sorry.
Kentucky, what they did this year, they had 400 applications, and then the Department of Ag just decided, based on where you fit, which 100 are going to be able to participate. And then that 3rd row, you just invested $100,000 in your program this year, but I don't really like you next year. Mm-hmm. So now the 5th row can stand up and the 4th row can sit down. Mm-hmm. That is not a model that helps a business and an industry emerge. So we believe, I come from the private industry, I don't come from the government, but I firmly believe that industry is better suited to develop an industry than government ever will be. And our job should be to make sure there are enough rules in place to keep the DEA out of here, and that you have the ability to have a level playing field.
Hear, hear.
Oh.
It is really exciting that we have these phenomenal advocates for this industry. Between Dwayne and Representative Polis and Samantha, we have all levels of government relations that are moving this industry forward, which is really exciting. We're going to open it up for questions. Wendy?
Hi. So thank you so much, all three of you, for the work that you do. I have a question about, it's being attributed to McConnell, but I'm sure you had something to do with it as well. The add-on to the appropriations bill for this year regarding transport. What does that impact? Is it between states where it's legal? And then when will those protections begin?
It actually doesn't impact anything because it's another one of these test votes. Unfortunately, the appropriations bills never become law. I don't know, in probably 15, 20 years since I've been in Congress, they've never become law. But what it shows is that it's what the House and the Senate believe in. We will try to get that into the actual appropriations mechanism that moves forward, meaning the omnibus or continuing resolution that has to occur by the end of September. It may or may not be in there, but that would be the place we would hope to include it. But what, again, it means is that this is what the House and, yes, the Senate and Mitch McConnell also want. So it's simply a matter of finding a vehicle that will actually become law, that we can then allow interstate transportation of legal industrial hemp crop into states where it's legal. So that would be the goal. Obviously, another important goal would be importation of viable certified seed from other countries like Canada. That would also require a legal change. So those are the types of things that we're pursuing legislatively. Again, I think we have a majority of both bodies willing to move forward with those kinds of things, but we just have to find the right bills to attach them to. The only time, one more thing, the only time that a regular member can actually get a vote on an issue is usually as part of the appropriations process. So that's why we do that. Normally you introduce a bill like the Industrial Hemp Farming Act, and it sits there for years or decades, and there's never a hearing in committee. We have one of our great former state senators here has been working for this a long time. State Senator Suzanne Williams is here, and as she knows, down in the state legislature in Colorado when she was there, you introduce a bill that actually gets a vote in committee, and as they also limit the number of bills each representative does. In Congress, it's very, very different. You introduce a bill, and maybe 0.1% of them actually get marked up in committee. The rest of them were never heard from again. So the only way that we can actually get a vote on the floor is what we have an open amendment process around appropriations bills, and that's when any member in that area, in that area, transportation or Department of Justice appropriations, can introduce an amendment and actually get their colleagues to have to vote yes or no on it. And even though that bill doesn't become law, it's still a vote of Congress, which shows where Congress is at on something, and then it's informative of how we can move the bill through a mechanism that'll actually see it through all the way into law.
All right, next question.
Instead of posing this as a question, I'm just going to make a comment so that it stays on the congressman's to-do list. But, you know, the entrepreneurs in here, you go into a new business bright-eyed and ambitious, and we're going to save the world with hemp. We run into some of the dumbest roadblocks when we try to do that. Opening a bank account, getting insurance. When you do your taxes, you'll find out that the DEA is not the only agency that hates you because the IRS thinks you're a criminal too. So get that up on the list.
No, those are valid points. So, I mean, the point being it's not just the DEA, even though they may be the ringleader in this regard. It's a matter of addressing the legal framework for industrial hemp across all the agencies, and in the meantime, kind of trying to do what we can to counter it, in each case.
Hi, I'm Veronica with Grow Hemp Colorado. I have two questions, one for Samantha Walsh and one for Dwayne Sinnings. Thanks, Dwayne, for all you do for all of us hemp people. I appreciate it. Samantha, I want to start with you. You mentioned you're with Rocky Mountain Hemp Association, also now known as National Hemp Association. The first ban on hemp has come in effect, essentially a ban in Pueblo County. I understand that yourself and another Rocky Mountain Hemp Association board member is critical in that. Can you please explain to us a bit about the ban, and then I'll ask Dwayne a question.
Sure, no problem. I would love to clear up obviously a lot of misconceptions out there that have been spread by people who don't really understand the issue that happened in Pueblo. So what we did, Rocky Mountain Hemp Association, when Amendment 64 passes, we made sure that hemp was a matter of statewide concern. That way, localities could not opt out of growing hemp the way that they can with marijuana. So with marijuana, you see it all the time. People think that they do, and they do. They ban the ability to be able to cultivate, grow, manufacture, process marijuana. But with hemp, we wanted to make sure that this is a purview that fell into the state. Now with that, counties have the ability to zone how they do agriculture. That is within their purview. That's what counties do. And Pueblo decided that because they have an economic interest with marijuana, which is a huge thing down there, they've definitely opened up their doors. Pueblo has been economically destitute. It's one of our hardest hit cities in the state of Colorado, and they opened up their doors to grow marijuana, and so they had those regulations in place, and when they decided to regulate how they were going to grow hemp, it came to a head issue. There was a big fight down there with marijuana people who wanted to ban hemp, but Rocky Mountain Hemp Association, said that we would fight it, and we did go to fight it. What they did is they zoned it to have male plants be grown outdoors indoors only within setbacks, and only allow female plants within certain radiuses. Now, whether or not Pueblo has the right to do that, we didn't agree with their decision. Rocky Mountain Hemp Association, we tried to fight it, and that's the decision that their county commissioners came to. I know that we're still working with them to try to relax those regulations, and that's just where they're at. And I'll let Wayne finish that up, because I'm sure this is an issue that's coming up with in a lot of counties are dealing with this right now.
Yeah, so as Samantha said, Pueblo has decided to they passed some laws that really outlawed what I would call traditional industrial hemp production. They focused on the CBD side of production only, because for economic reasons, anybody that's doing fiber understands you can't take a cutting and plant acres of that and make that economically feasible. I would tell you that just in the last 2 weeks, I've been approached by the county commissioners to understand that a little better. They do not feel that they understood the issue well. They do not feel that they were fully informed of where they were going, whether that was the marijuana industry that had perpetuated something on where they were trying to go to try to get where they were at. But they understand they've got some real legal challenges ahead. The setback is 5 miles. That would be in any court arbitrary and capricious, because there is no foundation for that 5 miles. So I think even Pueblo now is starting to take a different look at where they're at. And for the hemp industry, I know there's people in the room that are what I would call the textile people, the rope and soap people, and then there's CBD people. I would tell you that as you look ahead, you need to be finding a way to shake hands, because already in this state, there are people at the Attorney General's office that will be moving this year to move you CBD people under medical marijuana and recreational marijuana legislation. So if you can't find a way to come together, you will be that divided voice, and you will have no ability to continue to do the CBD material. So it is in your best interest to find ways to work together.
Thank you. That was my second question. Thank you. Oh, no, he answered it.
I would rather see him growing here than fracking or tar sands oil or any of that kind of thing. My father worked on a pipeline, and I got to see from his angle how many people were harmed just putting in the Alaska pipeline. And I don't want to see that kind of thing happening again. I want to see green energy in this country, and I want to see this country lead in it. And I want to know what I need to do to make that happen.
I would say one of the proposed and even in the experimental stages uses, as you know, industrial hemp is biofuel. I think you had a panelist earlier from Pure Vision, is that right? So talked a bit about that. I think there's maybe, just so you know, who else is interested or involved with hemp biofuel in the audience today? So these would be the folks to talk to, right? So there's a number of folks that are interested in around that space. It's not yet, it's close to, I guess, and you'll have to, again, talk to the Pure Vision folks at what point it becomes a cost-effective fuel and a scalable fuel with production. Obviously, it all is predicated upon scalable hemp production. You can't have biofuel with the small amounts being cultivated now. So that's absolutely one of the uses that people are looking into.
One other thing I'd add is we are looking at some phytoremediation projects, places that are Superfund sites. The EPA has actually shown some interest in talking to some of the folks about it. So, there may be opportunities for, as we've heard, for them, some of these sites to be cleaned up with the use of hemp. And that hemp potentially could still go to a biofuels place where those heavy metals are taken up, extracted out, and we could not only clean the soil but have a biofuels.
We have time for one more question with Representative Polis, and then he has to sneak out. Dwayne and Samantha will stick by for the rest of the panel. Tom in the back.
Not really so much a question, but I wanted to address hemp and how it's moving in the petroleum industry right now. We have a product that's utilized in drilling called lost circulation material and volcanoes. Talking with Jim about this earlier, but so one of the products that you're going to see coming into the petroleum industry is a hemp product. So we're looking to integrate that into an existing structure. Of course, your most powerful economic driver in the state of Colorado is the oil industry, then the agriculture industry. So we're looking to marry the two together so we can begin the process of extracting money from the petroleum industry through the usage of a superior product that is 100% organic, that will help protect Mother Earth. When they drill holes, we have, and that's going to be this organic product called drill wool. So in essence, we're going to come into the petroleum industry with a product immediately that will help them look better, we think, in regards to being friendly to our environment. And in that process, it creates opportunities for the farmers to grow more hemp. So we're trying the process of bringing the two together right now. And in that, create economics.
So since Tom didn't really ask a question, we have time for one more. Sir?
My question has to do with the word regulation. You imply that we're headed into a regulation regime. What I wanted to know is there currently a crop that we could use as a role model for regulating marijuana?
Tobacco, maybe.
Is there anything we regulate?
I think, and Dwayne will address this more in a moment, but I mean, like corn or any other crop, really. So as long as you are growing the certified seed, once we have it, it would have no more government interference than corn or wheat or any other industrial crop.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I often say I often say this should be just a slightly more regulated corn crop. That's today already. I mean, so when I have discussions with the Attorney General in the state, who is very opposed to hemp, probably more so than marijuana, I always tell him we just have a difference of opinion. To me, this is a slightly more regulated corn.
It's concerning. That's concerning. The AG's office is against hemp.
It's a very traditional law enforcement reaction that doesn't really have a basis in fact. I mean, anybody who looks at it know that you can't effectively do a polyculture without destroying your cash crop. So it's not rooted in anything other than the inertia of law enforcement and not everybody in law enforcement, but kind of the law enforcement establishment, if you will. So, but really, I mean, and this is the reason those of us who look at it objectively, I mean, those objections don't have a basis in fact. They simply don't, which is why we vociferously, speak out against them. I'm going to, our fellow panelists will have a chance to address more questions in a moment, but I want to just say how exciting it is, I think, for everybody to be here. And many of you might have been working or involved with this issue for years or for decades, but here we are at the point where it's becoming, it's reached critical mass, it's becoming mainstream. So a lot of what visionaries might have talked about 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of what even a few years ago seemed far away, is really here. And a lot of economic opportunities and far more companies, far more jobs than just the people here in this room will and are being created in the industrial hemp economy. And just like with any crop, it's not just on the production side. Yes, of course, there'll be farmers. It's not just on the processing side. But here in Colorado, we have great healthy lifestyle food supplement companies, Broomfield, Boulder, so many, a real startup ecosystem around healthy lifestyle companies. There'll be apparel and clothing companies. There'll be a whole host of economic opportunities that emerge from that production side, which is rapidly falling into place here in Colorado, leading the way. And of course, I'm sure many other states will follow suit as well. So I want to just express how exciting it is to kind of join you and for you to join us as we are in the early stages of something that will become an important part of the American economy.
We have time for a few more questions.
Important part of the American economy.